My name is Tori Thatcher, and I am 32 years old. 5 years ago, my mother called me exactly 3 days before Thanksgiving and uttered 7 cold, sharp words that shattered the fragile illusion of the family I thought I knew. Don't come home this year. Victoria doesn't want drama. There was no gentle preamble, no underlying tone of regret, and certainly no apology, just a heavy, metallic door slammed violently shut on 27 years of my desperate attempts to belong. I spent that miserable Thanksgiving evening sitting entirely alone at a dimly lit restaurant in downtown Boston, watching glowing, happy families laugh together while I silently fought back burning tears over a cold turkey dinner. I had absolutely no way of knowing that the kind strangers sitting at the very next table would slowly become the fiercely protective family I had spent my entire life praying for. Nor could I have ever imagined that 5 years later, those exact strangers would be introduced at my wedding as the cherished parents of the bride, while my biological parents stood watching from the back, uninvited and utterly devastated, realizing they had been permanently replaced in every single way that mattered. To truly understand how a daughter gets erased from her own family, you have to stand in the quiet ruins of the day it all fell apart. I remember with terrifying clarity precisely where I was standing when my phone began to vibrate on the wooden counter of my tiny studio apartment in Boston on November 21st. The small room was filled with the half-packed duffel bags I had carefully prepared for my trip home to Connecticut, and the warm scent of a pumpkin-spiced candle hung in the air, a pathetic attempt to get myself into the festive holiday spirit. I had already purchased my non-refundable plane ticket home weeks in advance, sacrificing a substantial portion of my modest monthly savings. When my mother's name flashed across the screen, a warm, naive smile spread across my face. I cleared my throat and eagerly answered, expecting to hear her ask what time my flight was landing or what dish she wanted me to prepare for Thursday's feast. "Hey, Mom." I was just about to pack up my final bag, I began, my voice brimming with genuine excitement. "Tori." Her voice cut through my sentence like a razor blade through silk, flat, detached, and devoid of a single drop of maternal warmth. "I need to tell you something right now, and I need you to just listen without making a scene." My stomach immediately dropped into a cold, hollow abyss. That specific tone of voice from Linda Thatcher had never, in my 27 years of existence, preceded anything good. The excitement evaporated from my chest, replaced by an instinctual, animalistic dread. "Mom? What's wrong? Is Dad okay? Did something happen?" "Your father is completely fine," she replied, letting out a short, impatient sigh over the receiver. There was a long, heavy pause on the line, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to crush you. "Listen. I've been thinking things over very carefully, and I want you to just stay in Boston. Don't come home for Thanksgiving this year." I let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh, desperately waiting for her to tell me it was an absurd joke or an ill-timed prank. "What? Mom, what are you talking about? My bags are packed. My ticket is printed. Victoria doesn't want any drama this year," my mother stated coldly, as if she were reading a routine business memo. "She's pregnant again, Tori. She's dealing with severe morning sickness, and she simply doesn't need the extra stress right now." I gripped the plastic edges of my smartphone so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. "Drama? What on earth are you talking about, Mom? Drama from what? I haven't spoken to Victoria in over 3 months." "Exactly," my mother snapped, her voice instantly hardening into an aggressive shield. "And your father and I think it's best to keep it that way for the holidays. You know how you get, Tori. You always bring this dark, intense cloud into the room." "How I get?" My voice cracked, betraying the intense panic surging through my veins. "Mom, the last time I spoke to Victoria was nearly a quarter of a year ago, when I gently asked her why I was the only person in the entire extended family who wasn't invited to her baby shower. That wasn't drama, Mom. That was a normal, Heartbroken question from a sister who was deliberately excluded. See? Look at you right now. That is precisely what I am talking about. My mother declared triumphantly, twisting my pain into evidence against me. You always find a way to make every single situation entirely about yourself. Your sister is carrying a child, Tori. She needs peace, quiet, and a happy atmosphere. She does not need your endless, needy grievances. I stood completely frozen in the middle of my small living room, staring out the window, at the heavy grey snow falling over the cold Boston pavement. I was 27 years old, a grown woman with a career and a life, yet in that single excruciating moment, I felt like a terrified, helpless 7-year-old child being shoved into a dark closet. Mom! I already bought my plane ticket. It took half my grocery budget for the month. Then call the airline and get a refund, or take the loss, she replied, her absolute finality leaving zero room for human negotiation. Victoria is pregnant. She is our primary priority, and she does not need the stress. Do you understand me? The line went completely dead before I could formulate another sentence. The sharp, electronic beep of the disconnected call echoed in my ear like a funeral bell. I understood. I understood with terrifying, absolute clarity that I had spent my entire life serving as the convenient, acceptable sacrifice on the altar of my sister's happiness. I wish I could say that heartbreaking phone call was an unprecedented anomaly in my family, but as I sank onto the edge of my unmade bed, staring blankly at the useless piece of paper that was my flight itinerary, a flood of painful memories rushed back to consume me like a horrifying highlight reel of my upbringing. I remembered my 16th birthday party, a modest gathering I had spent 4 painstaking months planning with my 3 closest high school friends. My mother had promised faithfully that she would bake my favorite chocolate cake and take us all out for a night of bowling. But on the morning of my birthday, Victoria came storming down the stairs weeping hysterically because she had failed her high school calculus midterm and was convinced her life was over. My birthday was instantly cancelled without a second thought. We spent the entire day sitting in silence, catering to Victoria's dramatic meltdowns, plying her with ice cream and endless reassurances. When I silently cried in my bedroom later that night, my mother slapped her hands together and sneered, "Don't be so dramatic, Tori. Your sister actually needs our emotional support right now. You can celebrate your silly little birthday next weekend." We never did. Then came my college graduation. I had worked 3 exhausting part-time jobs while carrying a full course load, scraping by on instant ramen, and 4 hours of sleep a night to put myself through school. I was the very first person in the history of the Thatcher family to graduate with highest honors. On that sweltering May morning, as I sat in my black gown among thousands of students, my eyes frantically scanned the bleachers for my parents' faces. Their assigned seats remained completely empty throughout the 3-hour ceremony. They finally showed up 2 hours after the commencement had ended, casually strolling across the lawn with iced coffees in their hands. Victoria had experienced a minor, routine morning sickness spell that required an unscheduled trip to her private obstetrician, and my parents had naturally insisted on driving her there themselves. When I confronted them with tears streaming down my face, my mother simply patted my arm patronizingly and murmured, "You have to understand, sweetheart, your sister's baby is far more important than a silly academic ceremony. More important than me." That was what she really meant. That was what every single action, every missed milestone, and every passive-aggressive comment had meant for 27 long years. I learned very early in life that expressing pain, or asking for basic fairness in the Thatcher household only invited violent verbal retaliation. Don't be so absurdly sensitive, Tori. Stop making every single thing about yourself. Why can't you just be genuinely happy for your sister for once in your life? So, I eventually learned to stop complaining. I rendered myself smaller, quieter, and as invisible as humanly possible. I operated under the tragic delusion that if I was agreeable enough, easy enough, and asked for absolutely nothing, I might finally earn a tiny shred of their conditional love. But sitting in that dark Boston apartment with a worthless plane ticket in my hands, the terrifying truth finally crystallized in my mind: there was no version of myself small enough to ever satisfy people who fundamentally viewed my existence as an inconvenience. Driven by a desperate, dying ember of hope, I picked up my phone and dialed my father's number. I don't know what delusional part of my spirit still believed he might step up, but I needed to know if he was truly complicit in my execution. The phone rang 4 agonizing times before Robert Thatcher finally answered. "Hey there, kiddo," his voice came through the speaker, cautious, strained, and quiet. He already knew. "Dad." My voice trembled violently. "Did Mom tell you what she did?" A long, suffocating pause stretched across the line. In the background, I could hear the muted noise of a football game playing on the living room television, the comfortable, normal sounds of a home I was banned from entering. She mentioned she talked to you, yes. And you're completely okay with this, Dad?" I choked out, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes. "You honestly don't think I should be allowed to come home for Thanksgiving? To my own family's house?" He let out a slow, uncomfortable breath. "You know how your mother gets when she sets her mind on something, Tori. She's just trying to maintain the peace in the house right now. She's maintaining the peace by completely throwing me away." I screamed into the phone, the rage finally breaking through my sorrow. "How is that keeping the peace, Dad? Tell me. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you and Mom are actively choosing Victoria over me for the 1000th time." Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. I could hear his heavy breathing over the line. I could vividly picture him sitting in his brown leather recliner, rubbing his forehead with his thumb and index finger the way he always did whenever he wanted to physically escape a difficult conversation. "Dad." My voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "Do you want me there?" 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds passed. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight suffocating my lungs. He cleared his throat weakly. I really think it's just better for everyone if you listen to your mother this year, Tori. Let's just let things settle down." Something fundamental inside my soul snapped cleanly in two. It wasn't an explosion of anger, nor was it a flood of fresh sorrow, it was a profound, icy emptiness. My father had been handed a direct, undeniable opportunity to stand up for his daughter, to utter a single word in my defense, and he had intentionally chosen cowardice instead. He had spent my entire life pretending to be the neutral mediator caught in the middle, but in that silent moment, I finally realized he wasn't in the middle at all. He was simply a quiet accomplice who comfortably stood on their side of the fence every single time. "Okay, Dad," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "Tori, sweetheart, don't be like." I said, "Okay, Dad. Have a good Thanksgiving." I ended the call before he could offer another hollow excuse. He didn't attempt to call me back. I sat motionless on the floor of my apartment, as the winter sun dipped below the horizon, watching the dark shadows stretch across the wooden floorboards. The darkness swallowed the room, but within that heavy obscurity, a quiet, unbreakable resolve began to form deep within my chest. If I was not welcome at their table, I would no longer spend my life begging for their crumbs. I would build a life of my own, far away from their toxic orbit. Thanksgiving morning arrived in Boston shrouded in a bitter, grey chill. I woke up in my studio to the muffled sounds of my upstairs neighbor's extended family arriving for the holiday, heavy footsteps pacing across the ceiling, children's joyful laughter echoing through the hallways, and the faint, agonizingly delicious aroma of roasted turkey and sage stuffing wafting through the building's ventilation shafts. I brewed a mug of cheap instant coffee and sat by the frosted window pane, watching the light snow drift silently down onto the empty streets below. My phone sat completely dormant on the counter all morning. No calls, no texts, not even a generic Happy Thanksgiving GIF from my parents or sister. Around noon, in a moment of pure emotional weakness, I made the colossal mistake of opening my Instagram app. The very first post at the top of my feed was a high-resolution photograph uploaded by Victoria. My entire biological family was gathered around my parents' lavishly decorated dining table in Connecticut, my mother, my father, Victoria, her husband Brad, and their 2-year-old son wearing a ridiculous little turkey pattern sweater. Everyone was beaming radiantly at the camera, holding up glasses of sparkling wine. The caption written beneath the photo read, "So deeply grateful for my absolute world. These are the people who matter most in this life. Heavy black heart # family first blessed." I zoomed in on the photograph with trembling fingers, meticulously counting the formal place settings arranged on the linen tablecloth. 4 adults. 1 toddler. Exactly 5 chairs. There was not even a ghost of an empty seat where I should have been sitting. They hadn't merely excluded me from their holiday meal, they had surgically erased my memory from their lives, celebrating my absence, as if it were a relief. I closed the app, set the phone down, and stared blankly at the ceiling. A dark, seductive urge washed over me to simply pull the heavy duvet over my head, stay in bed all day, and surrender to profound self-pity. That was precisely the script they had written for me, wasn't it? The dramatic, bitter, pathologically sensitive daughter weeping alone in her dark apartment, proving their absurd point. But as I lay there, a sudden flame of fierce, defiant dignity ignited within my spirit. No. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of ruining my spirit. If I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone, I was going to do it with dignity, surrounded by light, warmth, and real human energy. I threw off the blankets, pulled on my warmest wool coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and stepped out into the freezing Boston air. My objective was simple: find a high-end restaurant in the city that remained open for the holiday, and purchase myself a proper meal. The Harborview Grill was a legendary Boston institution, a sprawling, historic establishment characterized by polished dark mahogany paneling, gleaming brass fixtures, heavy velvet drapes, and crisp white linen tablecloths. It was the exact kind of timeless, elegant restaurant that radiated comfort and old-world charm. More importantly, it was one of the few upscale places downtown that served a formal Thanksgiving service. The moment I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors, a wave of glorious, decadent warmth enveloped me. The rich aroma of slow-roasted turkey, melted butter, fresh rosemary, and baking pies filled the air, mingled with the soft clinking of crystal wine glasses, and the vibrant hum of dozens of happy voices. The dining room was packed to absolute capacity, with families celebrating together, grandparents holding toddlers, parents laughing with college kids, and large groups of lifelong friends clinking glasses. It was a room overflowing with genuine human connection. The hostess at the front podium looked at me with a sudden, uncomfortable flash of pity when I approached her alone. "Welcome to the Harborview Grill. Just one for dinner tonight." "Yes," I said, holding my chin high and forcing a confident smile. "Just one, please." She led me through the bustling, dimly lit dining room to a tiny, round 2-person table tucked away in a corner, awkwardly wedged between the swinging kitchen doors and a massive, festive table that had been created by pushing 3 large square tables together. The large family occupying that adjacent table took up almost the entire section. They were so close I could have easily reached out my arm and touched the back of their wooden chairs. "Your server will be with you shortly, dear," the hostess murmured softly before quickly retreating. I sat down, unfolded the crisp cloth napkin onto my lap, and opened the leather-bound menu, desperately trying to project an aura of casual independence. But it was impossible to ignore the vibrant, chaotic joy radiating from the massive family sitting 6 inches away from me. They were celebrating with unapologetic enthusiasm. At the head of the long table sat an elderly couple in their late 60s, a distinguished man with silver hair and a woman with radiant, incredibly kind eyes. Surrounding them were a middle-aged couple, two young teenagers gleefully stealing food from each other's plates, and a handsome man in his early 30s who kept the entire table erupting in bursts of boisterous laughter. They passed heavy silver serving bowls back and forth without asking, interrupted one another with affectionate familiarity, and shared a deep, unspoken bond that filled the surrounding space with undeniable warmth. I watched them out of the corner of my eye, and a sharp, agonizing crack formed in the center of my chest. This is what a real family is supposed to look like, I thought, my throat tightening so severely I could barely swallow my water. Unconditional warmth. Unforced inclusion. Genuine joy. The server arrived a few minutes later, taking my order for the traditional turkey special. When the plate was eventually set before me, it looked like a cover photograph from a culinary magazine: crispy golden turkey breast, rich dark gravy, house-made cranberry chutney, and a perfect mound of buttery mashed potatoes. But as I picked up my fork, I found myself completely unable to taste a single bite. I sat there helplessly pushing the food around the porcelain plate, desperately attempting to stop my eyes from darting toward the joyful family beside me, trying in vain not to picture my own biological parents sitting in Connecticut, happily eating the dinner without a fleeting thought for the daughter they had discarded like trash. And suddenly, standing at the precipice of my absolute rock bottom, a profound realization washed over me. This terrifying isolation wasn't merely about a missed Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't about Victoria's pregnancy, or my mother's obsession with avoiding drama. It was the logical conclusion of a systematic, 27-year pattern of emotional abuse and neglect. I had spent my entire life frantically twisting myself into unnatural shapes, suffocating my own valid emotions, apologizing for simply existing, and begging for love from people who viewed my presence as a burden. And what had 27 years of submissive obedience yielded me? A lonely corner table in a crowded restaurant, a cold meal eaten in isolation, and an Instagram photograph featuring no empty chair. If I continued down this tragic path, if I kept desperately trying to be smaller, quieter, and more agreeable just to earn their conditional approval, there would eventually be nothing left of my soul to salvage. At some point, a person has to stop shrinking just to fit inside spaces that were never designed to hold them. The tears broke through my defenses before I could physically stop them. Hot, silent streams spilled over my eyelashes and rushed down my cheeks. Panicking, I quickly turned my face toward the frosted window pane, grabbing my cloth napkin and pressing it tightly against my eyes, desperately trying to render myself invisible, trying to disappear the way I had been conditioned to do my whole life. "Oh, honey." A gentle, deeply concerned woman's voice broke through my silent breakdown. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I froze instantly, holding my breath. I slowly lowered the napkin and looked up. Standing right beside my tiny table was the elderly matriarch from the large family next to me. She possessed silver-white hair styled in an elegant cut, soft, piercing blue eyes, and a face that somehow radiated a lifetime of profound empathy and genuine listening. She was gazing down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated compassion, looking at me as if my pain actually mattered to the world. "I'm completely fine," I lied reflexively, dabbing frantically at my soaked eyes. "I'm sorry, it's just severe winter allergies." The woman gently raised one silver eyebrow, not with judgment or mockery, but with a quiet, knowing wisdom. "Sweetheart, I've lived on this earth for 68 years, and I have never once seen allergies make a beautiful young woman sob into her dinner napkin on Thanksgiving Day." A sound escaped my throat that was half a bitter laugh and half a ragged sob. "Is it really that obvious?" "Only to someone who is actually paying attention," she replied softly, her voice carrying an unbreakable steel of maternal strength. "My name is Eleanor Morrison." I'm Tori," I managed to whisper. "Well, Tori," Eleanor said, glancing back toward her loud, laughing family before looking straight into my eyes again. Absolute no one should ever have to eat their dinner alone on Thanksgiving Day. It is a crime against humanity. Please, get up and come join our table. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I immediately shook my head in frantic protest. Oh, no, no. I couldn't possibly. I would be intruding on your family's private holiday. Please, don't worry about me. You are not intruding in the slightest, my dear, Eleanor declared firmly, a brilliant smile illuminating her face. I am formally inviting you. And in the Morrison family, an invitation from the matriarch is a mandatory royal command. I really, truly appreciate the kindness, Mrs. Morrison, but my husband tells the most atrocious, painfully dad-level jokes you will ever hear in your life, Eleanor continued seamlessly, utterly ignoring my polite protestations. And my middle son, Marcus, constantly attempts to incite intense political debates over the stuffing. You might as well come suffer through the chaos with us at the large table instead of suffocating over here in the corner. The elderly silver-haired gentleman sitting at the head of the large table turned around at that moment, offering me a warm, broad wave. She will never take no for an answer, young lady. Trust me, I've been married to that woman for 43 years, and I have never once won a single argument. The handsome younger son, Marcus, grinned broadly across the table. He's not lying, Tori. Save yourself and just come join the circus. I looked down at my cold, untouched plate of food, then looked at my damp napkin, and finally looked back up into Eleanor Morrison's warm, inviting eyes. I looked at her family, a group of complete strangers who somehow, miraculously, had an abundance of extra room at their table for a broken, forgotten girl. Okay. I heard my own voice say, trembling with shock. If you are completely sure. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Eleanor said gently, placing a warm, soft hand on my trembling shoulder. Come on, Tori. We just popped open a magnificent bottle of Cabernet, and there is entirely too much pumpkin pie waiting for us. I stood up on shaky, uncertain legs and followed Eleanor Morrison across the short expanse of floor toward her family's table, completely unaware that this single, spontaneous act of radical human kindness from a woman I had met 3 minutes ago was about to permanently rewrite the entire trajectory of my life. They made room for me as if my presence had been planned for months. Someone instantly pulled up a spare wooden chair from an adjacent booth. Someone else took my cold plate and replaced it with a fresh, steaming portion of food. Before I could even process what was happening, a heavy crystal glass of red wine was placed in my hand, and a warm, buttered roll was set on my bread plate. I'm Richard, the silver-haired patriarch announced, leaning across the table to shake my hand with a firm, comforting grip. This is my brilliant wife, Eleanor. That's our eldest son Daniel, his wife Sarah, their noisy little angels Emma and Lucas, and over there is our youngest, Marcus. Hi. I offered an awkward, timid little wave to the glowing faces staring back at me. I'm Tori. I really don't know how to properly thank you all for. So, what do you do for a living, Tori? Daniel asked casually, passing a heavy silver bowl of creamy mashed potatoes directly into my hands. I'm a freelance graphic designer, I stammered, taking the bowl. I mostly work with independent local businesses and publishing houses. That is incredible. Sarah exclaimed genuinely. I swear, I don't possess a single creative bone in my body. I can barely manage to draw a legible stick figure. Mom, stick figures are super easy. 8-year-old Emma chimed in loudly from across the table, her face smeared with cranberry sauce. Even Lucas can draw a stick figure, and he's only 5. The entire table erupted into a chorus of warm, genuine laughter. It wasn't a mean-spirited laugh aimed at belittling anyone, it was a collective, joyful sound shared with one another. It was a sound so completely foreign to my ears that it made my chest ache with a bizarre combination of awe and longing. Marcus caught my eye from across the table, offering me a conspiratorial wink. He possessed deep brown eyes, a warm, easy smile, and a grounded presence that instantly put me at ease. Fair warning, Tori, my father is currently gearing up to deliver the single worst turkey joke in North American history. Brace yourself. I am doing no such thing. Richard protested indignantly, though his eyes twinkled with mischievous delight. He definitely is, Eleanor confirmed calmly, taking a sip of her wine. Richard grinned broadly. Okay, fine. You caught me. What did the legal turkey say to the computer, Tori? Dad, please, no. Daniel groaned, covering his face with his hands. Google, Google, Google. Richard delivered the punchline with absolute triumph. The kids burst into uncontrollable giggles. Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically, Marcus shook his head in mock despair, and I let out a genuine, loud laugh, a real, uninhibited laugh that bubbled up from the very bottom of my soul for the first time in years. Richard raised his wine glass high into the air, looking around the table at his family before his eyes rested warmly on me. A toast to unexpected, wonderful guests who arrive out of nowhere to make our family table completely whole. To Tori. The entire table echoed in unison, raising their glasses high. I raised my glass with trembling hands, looking around at these incredible people, strangers who, until 15 minutes ago, didn't even know I existed, and felt a profound, overwhelming sensation bloom within my heart. Warmth. Total acceptance. True belonging. I had lived on this earth for 27 years, and I had never known that a family could actually feel like this. After the main feast was cleared and the children ran off to play near the restaurant's decorated fireplace, while the men engaged in a passionate debate about Boston sports, Eleanor quietly slid into the wooden chair directly beside mine. How are you feeling right now, sweetheart? She asked softly, her voice filled with motherly tenderness. How are you doing? Really? I looked down at my hands resting on the white linen tablecloth, feeling an immense lump form in my throat once again. I'm doing so much better, Mrs. Morrison. This entire evening it's been the most incredible thing that has ever happened to me. Thank you so much. You are more than welcome, Tori, Eleanor said gently. But that isn't what I asked you. I asked how you are doing deep inside. Do you want to tell me why a wonderful young woman was sitting completely alone in a dark corner on Thanksgiving Day? I hesitated, a familiar wave of shame washing over me. The unvarnished truth felt entirely too pathetic to speak out loud to a stranger. My own biological mother formally banned me from coming home. My sister views my mere existence as exhausting drama. My father quietly chose cowardice and abandoned me. But as I looked into Eleanor Morrison's patient, unblinking eyes, I saw zero judgment. I saw only an open, safe sanctuary waiting to receive my pain. My mom called me 3 days ago, I whispered, my voice breaking slightly as I stared at my lap. She explicitly told me not to come home for Thanksgiving this year. She said my sister is pregnant, and they didn't want any drama ruining their holiday feast. Drama? Eleanor repeated the word slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. And what, precisely, do they define as drama? Drama is what they call it whenever I politely ask questions they don't want to answer, I confessed, tears blurring my vision. Like asking why I was the only family member left off the guest list for my sister's baby shower. They told me I make every single thing in the universe about myself. Eleanor listened to every single word, nodding her silver head with a slow, deliberate grace. I see. It's totally fine, though. I added reflexively, my long-ingrained conditioning taking over as I tried to minimize my own hurt. I mean, it's obviously not fine, but I'm used to it. I've always been the difficult one in the family. Tori, sweetheart, Eleanor interrupted me, her voice dropping into a firm, commanding register that instantly demanded my complete attention. Can I share a vital truth with you that I learned over 30 continuous years of practicing as a top-tier family law attorney? I blinked back my tears, stunned. You were a lawyer. A retired family court litigation attorney, she corrected with a warm, knowing smile. In my 30 years inside courtrooms, I have witnessed every conceivable variation of family dysfunction, toxicity, and cruelty that human beings can inflict upon one another. And if there is one absolute, universal truth I have learned, it is this. The family members who aggressively accuse you of causing drama simply because you ask to be treated with basic human fairness are always the ones actively manufacturing the toxicity. They simply require a convenient scapegoat to carry the blame, so they never have to confront their own ugly behavior. Her words hit my chest with the explosive force of a physical impact. My breath hitched in my throat. You are not the problem in that family, Tori, Eleanor declared, leaning in and placing her warm hand directly over mine. You never were, and you never will be. Do you understand me? I couldn't utter a single word. I couldn't even breathe. Those were the exact, life-saving words I had spent 27 agonizing years waiting to hear from a mother's lips. The unforgettable Thanksgiving evening at the Harborview Grill wound down slowly, the way all truly wonderful dinners do. Rich pumpkin pie was served, dark coffee was poured into porcelain cups, and Daniel's young children eventually fell asleep peacefully across Sarah's lap, thoroughly exhausted from their joyful evening. When the server finally brought the check to the table, I instinctively reached into my purse for my wallet, but Richard immediately held up his hand, waving me off with a warm, indulgent smile. He insisted that taking care of the bill for new friends was a mandatory Morrison holiday tradition, leaving zero room for my polite objections. As we all gathered our heavy coats and prepared to step out into the crisp Boston night, Eleanor pressed a small, cream-colored business card with elegant black lettering directly into my palm. It read Eleanor Morrison, J.D., Family Law Retired, featuring her private contact information in Brookline. She looked straight into my eyes and told me with absolute seriousness that if I ever needed someone to talk to, I was to call her without hesitation. Richard warmly chimed in, extending an open invitation for me to join them for their weekly Sunday family dinners whenever I wished. Standing in that brightly lit lobby, holding the card of a woman I had met only 3 hours prior, I felt a wave of unbelievable warmth wash over me. I had no idea I had just stepped into the doorway of my true future family. I did not immediately attend the Sunday dinner the following week, nor the week after that. A deep-seated insecurity held me back. It felt far too surreal, too forward, and I was terrified of imposing on a real family's sacred private space. But Eleanor called my phone every few days just to check in on me, asking about my graphic design work with genuine curiosity and motherly warmth. By early December, I finally summoned the courage to accept her invitation. Standing on the porch of the Morrisons' historic Victorian home in Brookline, surrounded by glowing window lights and holiday decorations, I hovered near the door for 5 agonizing minutes before finally knocking. Eleanor opened the door before I could turn and run, pulling me into a fierce, welcoming hug, as if my arrival were the most natural, expected event in the world. That evening marked the first of countless Sundays. Over the next 6 months, I became a cherished regular at the Morrison table. Richard patiently taught me how to play chess, chuckling softly every time he defeated me. Eleanor shared her secret, unwritten pie crust recipe. Daniel's children naturally began calling me Aunt Tori, and Marcus and I developed a profound, effortless friendship that quickly became the steady anchor of my daily life. Meanwhile, my biological family maintained total silence, no calls, no texts, not even a holiday card, but for the first time in my life, I stopped noticing their absence because I was no longer shrinking myself to earn love. 2 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, the quiet bond between Marcus and me naturally evolved into something deeper, richer, and infinitely more profound. It was a love that had grown so organically from mutual respect and deep healing that acknowledging it felt less like a sudden beginning and more like recognizing what had always been meant to be. On a crisp autumn evening, Marcus took me back to the Harborview Grill, leading me to the exact corner booth where we had first met. Sitting under the warm glow of the ambient lights, his hands trembling slightly with nervous anticipation, he reached across the table, pulled out a small velvet box, and asked me to spend the rest of my life choosing him just as he chose me every single day. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy spilled down my cheeks as I whispered an emphatic yes, prompting the entire restaurant to erupt into warm applause, including Richard and Eleanor, who were sitting in a nearby booth holding champagne glasses, beaming with utter pride. Shortly thereafter, the wedding planning began in full swing. Yet, amidst the excitement of choosing venues and flowers, a familiar, painful shadow surfaced when it came time to address the formal wedding invitations. I was paralyzed by the line designated for the parents of the bride. I was pacing anxiously in the Morrisons' living room one evening when Eleanor gently intercepted me, asking what was weighing so heavily on my spirit. When I tearfully confessed my pain over the invitation line, explaining that Robert and Linda Thatcher had not spoken a single word to me in over 2 years, and had forfeited any right to be honored on my special day, Eleanor took my hands in hers and brought up a concept she had briefly mentioned months prior: legal adult adoption. She explained that adult adoption was a formal legal process through which a consenting adult is officially and permanently adopted by a chosen family, establishing an absolute, legally recognized parent-child relationship, complete with a revised birth certificate and formal next-of-kin status. Looking into the eyes of the woman who had fed my soul, healed my spirit, and taught me what true maternal love looked like, I choked out a plea, asking if she and Richard would ever consider officially taking me in. Eleanor instantly pulled me into a fierce, tearful embrace, whispering that they had considered me their true daughter since the very first night we met, and were simply waiting for me to be ready. Over the next several months, Eleanor expertly navigated the legal process, and when the family court judge officially signed the final order, I legally became Tori Morrison. When the formal wedding invitations were finally printed and mailed 3 months prior to the ceremony, they bore a line that filled my heart with overwhelming pride: parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Morrison, the family who chose her. Unsurprisingly, news of the upcoming nuptials eventually trickled back to my biological family through distant social acquaintances. For the first time in nearly 3 years, my phone suddenly exploded with frantic text messages and missed calls from my biological mother, Linda. She demanded to know why she hadn't been informed of my engagement, brazenly asserting her rights as my real family. I read her hysterical, demanding texts with a profound sense of emotional detachment. The old rage and desperation had vanished, replaced by an unbreakable, peaceful clarity. I blocked her number entirely, refusing to allow her toxic energy to pollute the sacred life I had built. Undeterred, Linda took her entitlement a step further, showing up unannounced at my Boston apartment a week later, shoving her way past my front door to demand an invitation to the wedding. I stood tall in my own living room, looking at the woman who had abandoned me, and calmly informed her that she had relinquished her claim on my life the moment she told me not to come home. When she hysterically tried to minimize her past cruelty, asserting that family is family, I firmly escorted her to the door, informing her that she no longer had a seat at my table. The day of the wedding arrived in early June, bathed in the golden, luminous sunlight of New England. The venue was a breathtaking, historic vineyard nestled in the rolling hills, featuring sprawling grapevines, ancient oak trees, and a beautifully restored stone barn decorated with hundreds of white roses and lush greenery. In the sunlit bridal suite, as I stood before a full-length mirror wearing an exquisite lace gown, Eleanor tenderly adjusted my veil, her eyes brimming with tears of pure affection. Looking at my reflection, I barely recognized the confident, radiant woman staring back at me. She was a world away from the broken, weeping girl who had sat alone in a restaurant corner 5 years prior. When the music began to play, Richard proudly walked me down the outdoor aisle, his eyes shining with fatherly pride, to where Marcus stood waiting under a floral archway. We exchanged our handwritten vows, promises rooted in unwavering support, deep respect, and unconditional love, bringing half the assembled guests to tears, as we were officially pronounced husband and wife. The reception that followed inside the stone barn was a vibrant, joyous celebration filled with laughter, delicious food, and clinking glasses. However, midway through the evening, the chief security officer I had discreetly hired for the event quietly approached my side, informing me that a couple claiming to be my biological parents had arrived at the front gate, causing a scene and demanding entry. Marcus immediately stepped up, offering to have them formally removed from the premises, but I gently stayed his hand. I realized in that exact moment that I no longer possessed any fear of them. I wanted them to witness the absolute reality of the life I had created without them. I instructed the security team to allow Linda and Robert Thatcher into the venue, but directed them to place the uninvited pair at the very back of the room, far away from the head family tables. A few minutes later, I watched from afar as my biological parents stepped into the grand, glowing room, looking deeply uncomfortable and completely out of place amidst the high society crowd celebrating my happiness. The timing could not have been more poetic. Moments after their quiet entry, the event toastmaster stepped up to the central microphone, tapping his glass to request the room's attention for a very special announcement. The room fell into an expectant hush as the microphone amplified his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue our evening festivities, please stand and join us in honoring the wonderful parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Morrison." The entire room erupted into enthusiastic applause, cheers, and whistles as Richard and Eleanor stood up from the primary head table, beaming radiantly and waving to the crowd as the photographer captured the glowing moment. From across the room, I watched my biological mother's face turn completely ash-white in real time. The sheer shock, confusion, and horror on Linda's face were palpable, as the undeniable weight of those words hit her like a physical blow. Richard and Eleanor Morrison, the parents of the bride. She grabbed Robert's arm frantically, her mouth opening and closing in utter disbelief, as she finally realized that the legal, public, and emotional title of mother had been permanently and officially stripped from her. Unable to contain her narcissistic outrage, Linda broke away from the back area and marched aggressively through the crowded tables toward the main floor, her face flushed with humiliation, with my biological father trailing nervously behind her. She reached the edge of the head table just as the applause began to taper off, her voice rising into a sharp, bitter hiss that immediately drew the attention of surrounding guests. "What on earth is the meaning of this absurd circus, Tori? Who are these imposter people, and why are they being introduced as your parents?" I stepped forward, standing side by side with Marcus, keeping my posture entirely regal, and my voice deadpan. "They are not imposters, Linda. They are my legally recognized parents. I was officially adopted 2 years ago." Linda actually staggered backward a step, her eyes bulging in pure horror. You legally adopted new parents. You can't just replace your real family." I looked at her with total, icy serenity. "I didn't replace you, Linda. You abandoned me 5 years ago, when you slammed the door on Thanksgiving. I simply filled the empty seats with people who actually loved me." Surrounding conversations died instantly as guests began to realize a confrontation was taking place. Linda's cheeks burned crimson as she recognized the staring crowd, but her deep-seated arrogance prevented her from backing down. "That was one single holiday years ago, you ungrateful, dramatic girl," she hissed, trying desperately to play the victim. "You are still my daughter." "Not legally," I replied smoothly, holding up my left hand so my sparkling wedding rings caught the ambient light. "Not emotionally. And certainly not anymore." It was in that excruciating moment that my biological father, Robert Thatcher, finally spoke up for the first time in years. His face was deeply lined, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and to my absolute shock, tears were streaming silently down his cheeks, the very first time I had ever seen him cry in my 32 years of life. He stepped past his furious wife, looked straight into my eyes, and choked out, I am so deeply, deeply sorry, Tori. I was a complete coward for 27 years. I watched them mistreat you. I stood by and let them make you feel worthless. And I did nothing to protect my little girl. I am so sorry. The words I had spent my entire childhood desperately weeping for had finally arrived, but as I looked at the broken man standing before me, I felt no surge of triumph, only a quiet, tragic understanding. I appreciate hearing those words, Dad, I said, my voice gentle yet unbreakable. But an apology today cannot rewrite 27 years of intentional neglect, nor can it give me back the childhood I spent begging for your love. I forgive you in my heart so that I can live in peace, but forgiveness does not mean you get a seat at my table. Linda glared furiously at Eleanor, spitting out, "You've stolen my daughter from me, you opportunistic woman." But before Eleanor could even respond, Richard Morrison stepped forward, placing himself protectively between Eleanor and Linda. Richard's face was completely calm, backed by an iron authority that commanded the entire room. "We did not steal anything from you, Mrs. Thatcher," Richard stated in a deep, powerful voice that carried across the quiet hall. 5 years ago, a heartbroken young woman sat entirely alone in a restaurant on Thanksgiving because her own biological family told her she wasn't wanted. My wife and I simply opened our hearts and invited her to sit at our table. We didn't steal your daughter. You threw her away like trash, and we simply picked up the precious blessing you discarded. Richard then raised his hand, signaling the discreet security team standing near the entrance. "And now, this is my daughter's wedding day, the happiest, most sacred day of her life, and I will not allow anyone to pollute her joy. Please escort these people off the property immediately." As the professional security guards moved in to firmly guide the stunned, humiliated Thatchers toward the exit, I took a step forward, holding up my hand to give them one final message. Looking my biological parents in the eyes for the absolute last time in my life, I said softly, "I don't hate either of you. I have made my peace with who you are, people who chose comfort and favoritism over genuine love. But I have also made peace with who I am, a woman who deserves to be chosen first, loved completely, and valued unconditionally. Goodbye." With those final words, they were led out into the night, and the room instantly erupted into warm, supportive applause as my true family wrapped their arms around me. The remainder of the wedding was an absolute blur of pure magic, dancing, and overwhelming love. In the months and years that followed, my life expanded into a beautiful tapestry of joy and fulfillment. Marcus and I purchased a charming Cape Cod home in the Boston suburbs, complete with a sprawling backyard, just 20 minutes away from Richard and Eleanor's house, ensuring our quiet Sunday dinner tradition continued uninterrupted. My graphic design business flourished under my newfound confidence, leading to a prestigious partnership at a top-tier creative agency. 2 years after our wedding, Marcus and I welcomed our first child into the world, a beautiful, healthy baby girl whom we proudly named Emily Grace Morrison. Holding my daughter in my arms in the quiet nursery, looking at Richard and Eleanor beaming down at their granddaughter with boundless adoration, I whispered a solemn promise to my child, that she would never, ever have to earn her place in our home, that she would never be asked to make herself smaller to keep the peace, and that she would live every single day of her life knowing she was fiercely, unconditionally wanted. I had spent 27 years cowering in the dark shadows of a family that viewed me as a burden, but through the transformative power of chosen love, I had finally found my way home.